Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio. This is Dr. Jacalyn Kerbeck, and our show today is A Woman's Prerogative Part 2. We had a lively conversation earlier today with some of our panelists, and I'm sure the wonderful conversation will continue today. Our topic is telling the truth about how you feel. When and how do you do it? So what is this really about? Sometimes we want to say something to someone, and instead of actually going directly to them, we go behind their back and ask somebody their opinion. What do you think about Susie and how she's been acting lately? And then we go to somebody else. What do you think? And then we never go directly to the person. So we're going to explore that as well as some other parts of this whole process. Let's welcome the star of our show. She's a day ahead, and she's in New Zealand. Her name is Mariska. Welcome.
Hello, and it's lovely to be back with you.
It's great to see you again. Always a day ahead and a dollar smarter than we are, because you know what's going on. So,
yes, the future living has its perks.
So for people who are just joining us for the first time and they're wondering what it is that you do and how you can help them, why don't you give them an overview?
Ooh. So what it is that I do is I help people that would love to transition from a specialization into leadership, and those that's already in leadership going up within their leadership space, to bring a little bit more humanness into their environment. And it relates very much to the topic that we have today around telling the truth about how we're feeling. And Dr. Jacalyn, as you mentioned a little bit earlier on, sometimes people do not do this thing quite the way that we can optimally do it. And interestingly enough, I had 2 coaching conversations this week related to this topic, so I cannot wait to jump in.
Wow, how about that? What's the likelihood of that? That's interesting. Our lovely friend and colleague JENETTA came up with this topic. So I think the one place I'd like to start with the topic is in a business situation, because there are many times in business, maybe it's about a leader, maybe it's about a team member or a colleague, maybe it's our boss, and we're afraid to actually go directly to that person. So instead, we want to get a quorum of people to make sure that the way we're feeling is the way they're feeling. And then somebody will go and speak on the whole group's behalf. And that doesn't usually work out too well. What's your experience? Have you ever been party to that?
I have had occasions where that happened within the working environment that I've been in. And I have to say, a part of this to take into consideration is psychological safety. So typically when we feel psychologically safe, it is easier to then discuss emotions, especially when it is the less comfortable ones within the environment, than when we are not feeling psychologically safe. So when we have an environment where there's a lot more unsafeness within the psychological space, I have found that people do have a tendency to then start to group together. One, it is because we feel safer with another person going, yeah, that's my experience too, because we are supported in that way, especially in an environment where typically we don't feel like it's a safe place. And it, especially if there's a tendency to get a whole group, a big group of people together, it reminds me a little bit of movies where you have a ship captain and the captain goes a little bit nuts for whatever reason, and there's a mutiny, right? So it has a bit of that feeling because of the safeness of the environment in which they expose themselves. So if the whole crew is standing up to whatever unrighteous thing the captain is doing, it's a lot easier to then overthrow said captain than when it is only maybe one or two crewmates and the captain get the rest to just throw them overboard. So we preferably don't want to be thrown overboard, and hence the phenomena. Whether it is the best to be practicing is, of course, a different conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I was sharing a kind of role play earlier today, which was, you have a scenario where you're not getting along with your boss, and instead of going directly to your boss, you go to this person, and then you go to that person, and then you elect someone to actually go to the boss. So now the boss is hearing that you and your colleagues have been talking about him and did not come directly to him. So now, instead of having an opportunity for one-on-one dialogue where the two of you could possibly work out whatever the situation is, now it's basically, hey, I talked to the whole department and everyone pretty much feels the same. How do you think that that will end up, the results for that relationship between that boss and that employee?
Ooh, not great. Definitely not great. And in saying that, I have also seen the same thing happen where the boss, and this was a very interesting case, was not as self-aware. So they didn't even realize that that was what they were doing or take on the feedback. So, Dr. Jacalyn, what would you do in a case like that?
Do, 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 do. I think everything comes down to communication and the way you present something, the tone of voice, the time in which you present it really makes a big difference. So, for example, if you were to go and confront someone in front of a group of people, not a really good idea. If you confront someone after you've gotten some bad news, or maybe you've had a bad day and then you're emotionally triggered, or something happened with them that you might not even know about. So I always think that, and this isn't the way I always looked at things because I was unaware, but I feel now that if you lead with kindness and ask, hey, I just wondered, how are things going for you? Why do you ask? Well, I just noticed you don't seem yourself. You don't have to label it, or I'm here to help you. I just want to support you. I feel like that is a good way to approach someone, and then maybe get into whatever it is that's going on. What do you think?
I think the approach makes a big difference. So the way that we approach the conversation and understanding where we are at and where the other person is at, and being able to read that as well. As you mentioned, Dr. Jacalyn, if I were to go into a conversation and I'm not in a great mood, the likelihood of the conversation being great has radically reduced. And the same for the other person. So if I go into a conversation with someone else and the other person is, for some odd reason, I don't know, maybe their cat died or something happened, right? That I didn't know about, they might not be in a space to have the conversation in an open, honest way that we need to have. Also taking into consideration what the content of the conversation might bring up for us or for them. We might feel like we are ready to have the conversation, and then once we start the conversation, something gets triggered and we're not in a great space anymore. So understanding what can come up for us as well as how we are stepping into the conversation, and then having said conversation. So as you might notice, there's a lot of planning that goes into these conversations.
Absolutely. And of course, these conversations aren't just taking place or not taking place in the business world. They're occurring in personal lives as well. And we talked earlier today even about ghosting, when people don't want to have the conversation. So what are your thoughts if you have a girlfriend, some family member, someone that you are very close to in your life, and something about them is bothering you, or something that you're doing together isn't working anymore? How would you address that?
Well, I will first of all think about where they're at that point in time. And then also think about where I'm at. Because if I feel that something isn't working for whatever reason, there might be a likelihood that they feel the same way. Or it might be that they are blissfully unaware of any problem whatsoever. So thinking about, for instance, those relationships that we hear about where that one person said, well, I didn't even know that there was a problem. So for some people, they might not know that there's a problem. So really thinking about where I'm at, where the other person may be at or may not be at, and then figuring out how I will approach the topic. So that would be my first goings about it, in my own private way of doing that. And then I will also come up with a couple of things that not only outcomes of the conversations, it's more of a understanding what it is that I would like the conversation to be like, if that makes sense. So thinking about the conversation, the feel of the conversation, how I want the conversation to feel like, what it is that I want to bring across, so that for the other person, what it is that I want to discuss, how it is that we might be ending the project that we are working on, or wrapping up whatever the thing is that we were busy with, if that is something that we don't want to do anymore. And also understanding the other person's point of view, because we don't know where the other person is coming from or what they know or don't know. So it might be for them a shock, or it might not. And I don't know which one it will be until we start the conversation. So for me, initially, I will first go through a whole bunch of thinking to make sure that I have not necessarily considered all the possible scenarios, more of I am very clear as to how I want to have this conversation, and then go into the conversation. Of course, also, we can only control our own reactions. We cannot control the other person's reactions. So understanding that in best case scenario, what I will be doing, and in worst case scenario, what I will be doing. So I have a little bit of a plan as to how I want to approach the conversation, regardless of what the other person then does or doesn't do, to still have that feeling that I wanted to get out, that I started with initially. So that would be my approach. I'm not sure whether that was helpful at all.
Well, it's okay. It's your approach. That's everybody has their own way of doing things. I think when people feel the need to get other people's opinions before they actually go and have a conversation, it's because of insecurity. And maybe the part they're missing is that if I say something to you about you, that's how I feel. That doesn't mean that's how you feel. It doesn't even mean it's valid. My feelings are valid, but that doesn't mean you have to accept them or take them on or make any type of change.
No, it's literally, it's almost like when we look at an elephant and we're standing really, really close to the elephant, and you standing at the trunk and I'm standing at the tail. And somebody asks, so what is it that you see? And I start to explain that there's this very thin, long thing, and it has hair on the end, and it's not a lot of hair, and they sort of coarse, and they're sort of stickly, and maybe I can use them for a paintbrush. And you say, no, that's not what it is. It's actually this long thing. It looks almost like a snake, but it doesn't have scales on it. There's a few hairs, yeah, but there's no point that sort of makes the same as a paintbrush. And there's these two weird holes at the end. So because we're looking from different points of view, we're seeing different parts of the elephant, right? And that's typically what normally happens in any conversation is we have a tendency to approach the idea, the topic, the whatever it is that we're discussing from different ends. And if we are not clear as to which side we're standing on so that we can both look from the same place, it becomes really difficult to have a proper conversation about, well, almost anything. And what we can do to help that conversation is to be curious. So really being curious about where the other person is looking from and their point of view. So if they feel a certain way, okay, they feel that way, for what reason? So what happened for them to feel that way? It might be that they have a specific value that I inadvertently stomped on because it wasn't a value for me. And that made them upset. And now they're upset with me. And if I understand that it is a value that I impacted, I can see why they would be upset. And I can also see that I would have been upset if that was my value that got stomped on. So being curious about what's going on for the other person helps us to also see their point of view. We don't need to agree with it in the sense of go through the same thing or feel the same thing, but at least be able to pivot ourselves in order to either see the elephant's tail or the trunk, depending on where the other person is standing and looking from.
Absolutely. And also, there are times in a relationship, maybe it's a romantic relationship, where one person isn't happy with the other, but doesn't actually come out and say this. And sometimes people will say, hey, it's not you, it's me. I don't really think it's anything about you. And meanwhile, it is definitely about them. But we say it's about me, to be nice and give the other person grace so that no matter what the other person says, we still have a way out. Because if we're saying you're this, you're that, you don't do this, you don't call, you can say, hey, I'll change. I'll be different. Watch me change. And if I say it's all me, there's nothing you can do.
That's true. That's true. It's also interesting how, and this comes back to what I mentioned a little bit earlier on having these type of conversations with some of my clients. It's around feedback. Telling the truth about how we feel is also a form of giving feedback. We feel a certain way because something happened. We've had an experience of something, something got triggered. The feelings came up for a reason, right? So understanding firstly for ourselves exactly what it is that happened. And I think a lot of the time, and that's maybe going back to my process, that's possibly for me a lot of the time where I see some of this comes in, is people that really take the time to understand for themselves what was happening for themselves. So if I can understand what exactly is the emotion that I'm feeling, right? Okay, so anger, yes, but I might not be necessarily angry as in the the highest form of it, I might be annoyed. So understanding exactly the emotion that we feel, then understanding what got that emotion triggered. So to me, emotions, the way that I think about emotions is it's like little flags. So when there's an emotion that comes up, it's a little flag to tell me there's something there that needs attention of some sort. Now, typically, when we stomp on somebody's values, for instance, the emotions are very high in intensity, and they are also very protective in nature. So we will get people, they get angry at us, or they're sad, or they don't want to talk to us, they ghost us for whatever reason, right? So it's literally an emotional response to a value that got stomped on. And understanding what's going on for me makes it a lot easier for me then to articulate and speak to the other person about what is happening. But if I don't even know what's going on for me and then I want to have that conversation, oh man. From personal experience, not a great idea. So I don't know. Dr. Jacalyn, what do you find typically works best for you?
Oh, it's really hard. I mean, there's that old strategy of the sandwich where you say something nice, then you give the information, then you say something nice at the end. And I think that is a good way. I do think when there are issues that are really serious, which are going to be life-changing, that no matter how you package it, it's difficult. So let's say you're in a relationship with someone and you're not in love with them anymore. You just don't want to be with them anymore. You've thought a lot about it. Maybe you've had therapy, you've done the work internally, and that's it. And you meet with the person and you know it's going to break their heart. And there's really no nice way to say it. So you give the information, and then this is the opposite side. When you're receiving the information, you weren't expecting it, or maybe you thought something was going on, but you didn't want to deal with it. So I really think that this is where setting boundaries and expectations comes up, because that's going to be a long conversation. So that's not something that you're just going to tell somebody randomly. Hey, by the way, just want to let you know, I'm not happy with you anymore. I'm leaving tonight. Got my bags packed. If you've been with a person for some amount of time and you love them at some point and you respect them at some point, the way you approach them should be the same way as well, with respect and dignity, and giving them the time to hear you out. And I do know that at some point, because people share this with me, when they get to the point when they're just ready, they don't really want to have a conversation because they don't value the relationship anymore. They've already moved on in their mind. And for the other person, it's a very tough thing to take. But I also say this: if somebody doesn't want to be with you, why would you want them to stay?
That's, I think, especially when it comes to a relationship where it has run its course, literally, it isn't fun, right? There's still a lot of emotional stuff that we will need to deal with and work through, and be gracious with ourselves to go through the grief process. So the person that's leaving may or may not have gone through that grieving process. They might have a little bit of a head start to the other one, or they may not. We don't know where they are within that process, but being gentle with ourselves. I remember very wise words from a very wise man that I worked with that said, his wife passed away a couple of years before I worked with him. And he said one of the things that he realized with the emotions when it came to thinking about his wife and her passing was that if he blocked it off, if he tried very hard not to be sad or to be happy for her sake, because he knew she would want him to be happy, and he blocked those sad emotions off as best he could, they will still come in, but they will literally break the door down. And the more violently they came in, they will also leave with the same amount of violence. Whereas if he held the door open, so if he was gracious about the emotion and just let it be, just let the emotion be, so it can come in, it would also leave with grace. So understanding that whatever emotional thing is going on for us, to be gracious with ourselves for the whatever the emotion is, because trying to bottle it up or move it away or ignore it or, I don't know, overwork, ghost, name it what you want. Whatever the thing is that we avoid the emotion, it will literally break the door down and come in quite violently and leave quite violently. Whereas if we do it graciously, I mean, it's going to do what it's going to do regardless. We can choose how graciously it does it. So understanding that is a big help. And then within the relationship conversations, if the time has passed, the time has passed. And we sometimes see people that's been married for, I don't know, 20 plus years, kids are out of the house, and then all of a sudden they get divorced. Actually, they got divorced a long time ago. The bodies were just in the same vicinity. So I'd rather be with somebody and be really happy, like I am, than be with somebody and not be happy, because what's the point?
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that I'd like to share is when a relationship is over, it could be a friendship, it could be a family member, it could be a romantic, it could be business. I actually have a process that I didn't even realize I had, but I take some time to think about the situation from an unemotional perspective. And if somebody else were viewing the situation, that's how I view it. And then I look at it as how I actually feel about the situation. And is the situation, if it were to be rectified, is it good for my health? Is it a type of situation, a relationship that is a pattern over years where, and this happens, we see this, right? It's this, especially in narcissistic relationships, the same behavior happens over and over again. And we just say, okay. So I look at it from the two different perspectives and I say to myself, okay, if I allow myself to be part of this relationship again, how could we move forward? And is the other person where I am? Because some of us do a lot of work on ourselves and some people do not do as much work. And so I evaluate those things and then I make a decision. So if I decide, okay, it's not going to work out, I literally will delete them from my devices. And the reason is I don't do it in a mean way. I do it because I don't want any negativity on my phone. I don't want any negativity on my computer. So I delete them. I delete their number, their information. I wish them well. I forgive them. I pray for them. And then it's like a book that has been closed. And it's not closed in anger. It's closed as though that chapter is now closed. And we're on to another chapter. Thank you for the time that we did have. Thank you for what I did learn. Thank you for the love, the sharing. And I hope that you are bringing that through in other ways to other people in your life.
Yeah, there's, what's the saying around relationships and seasons?
Yes, seasons and reasons.
And that's literally what it is. Sometimes we are meant to be with a certain person to learn certain lessons for longer durations, and other times not. It might be that we just needed them in our life for, I don't know, a week or whatever length of time we got to spend with them. But I really appreciate, Dr. Jacalyn, the grace in which it is. It almost feels like a thank you for honoring. There's the word, an honoring of the relationship because it still has value, right? We still learned lessons from it. We still gained a lot from the relationship while we were in it, because we had it for a reason. There was a reason why we had that relationship, whether it is a friendship or romantic or business or whatever relationship it was. And have an honoring for what transpired and what we gained from that relationship before then moving on to, well, bigger, better, different things.
Absolutely. You know, I wish, of course, it's always like this. You wish you knew this when you were younger, but that's the journey. But when I was younger, if somebody would disappear, I literally would start calling hospitals and thinking, and you know, it's so funny because if you think about it, if you literally take a step back and you think about it, all of us can be found, right? If somebody wants to be found, we have patterns of behavior. There's public information, the public domain about where we are, how to contact us. So when we start thinking, and unless, you know, in extreme cases, people do disappear, people are kidnapped, there are, you know, horrible things that do happen. But typically, if somebody is not getting back to you, there's a reason. And when I was younger, I would literally chase after people, especially if it was a guy I was dating, like, what's wrong? Is, you know, and there was nothing wrong. They just didn't want to be in a relationship with me at that time, but didn't want to tell me that. And so as I've gotten older, and especially through the pandemic, as so many things changed, we really were more isolated and not getting out with people that we've been out with for, you know, in the past. And I started to say to myself, okay, the pandemic has really level set where people are focusing on things that are really important. So that's what I decided. I was going to focus on relationships that are really important, that are mutually beneficial, and that where I am today, that it fits in with what I'm doing, and what I'm doing fits in with what they're doing, as opposed to trying to hold everything together and hold everybody who is in my life. No, I've outgrown that kind of mentality.
And I think honoring, so for me, a part of the honoring of the relationship is for those people that do like ghosting. Part of the honoring is letting the other person know about what's going on for us. And again, back to the understanding first for ourselves, what the hell is going on. And then having that conversation. And yes, it might not always be the easiest of conversations. Understanding how we want to have the conversation. And as I said, worst case scenario, best case scenario, because we don't know what the other person will be doing, how we want to be handling it throughout, so that we are clear for ourselves. Dr. Jacalyn, to your point around boundaries, we know what our boundaries are, so that we can set them in place and say, so this is what I would like to discuss. This is how I would like it to happen. And it's an honoring, not only of me, but of both of us and the relationship, because that's like a third entity within that space that we want to have this discussion about. And it's not, I know that it's not always easy to leave on good terms, but it's not impossible. So the only way to find out how possible it is for us to take that first step. And ghosting is not a step.
Very true. Very true. And I think also something that we have to be prepared for, as you know, being an elevated listener, the power of listening is that we set boundaries and we ask for permission. So we ask for permission. Mariska, I really need to speak with you about something very important. And I think it's going to take a couple of hours for us to really appreciate and respect what it is I'm going to share with you. And you may give me the time, and then you may start to lose it, or I start to lose it and getting angry. Sometimes I remember I was in a relationship and somebody was throwing things at me and screaming like a lunatic. You have to have boundaries yourself and say, okay, this is not acceptable. I am not in a position where I can calm the other person down. So I'm going to actually just leave. I'm going to excuse myself. I'm going to go another room. And depending on how heated the conversation is and how the person, what their tendency is for anger, etc., you may have to call the authorities, or you may have to just get in your car and leave, because breaking up with somebody is not an easy thing to do, especially when somebody is a narcissist, which is a whole other show, or they're so insecure that they can't imagine being with you. So again, that's the whole key to this topic, is about the truth of telling somebody something, when and how you do it. And another thing I'd like to just share is anticipating possible outcomes. So being prepared that what you're about to say might not go the way you think it's going to go. It could even be a work situation. You might go in and be prepared to share something with your supervisor, your manager, your leader, and maybe that's your last day of work.
Yeah. And it goes back to the whole feedback principle. So when we think about giving feedback, so say for instance, I don't know, a teammate did something that they weren't supposed to do, or they gave a presentation, and during the presentation, all the who's from Whoville was literally in the room. All the important people, we really want to impress them, we really want to look good. And the person doing the presentations had a lot of everywhere scattered in. And we know this person are really well spoken, generally. They know exactly what they're talking about. And yet it didn't sound like it because of all the that came into the presentation. So how do we then broach this? We can't, preferably, we don't want to be saying, hey, buddy, you just screwed everything up for everyone, because we're not going to get this project off the floor and blah, blah. So the way of giving good feedback, so this is more on a feedback sort of approach, is looking at the facts and looking at the behavior of the person. So exactly what it is that they did, not the feelings and the emotion that came with it. We also want to make sure that we are very clear on what the impact was of what was done. So the more clarity we can have within that conversation, and when there are emotions to be discussed, noting that the emotion, taking ownership of it. It is my emotion. It is how it made me feel. I don't know about the other people in the room. I don't know about you. I don't know about the next person. It's my emotion. So taking accountability for our own emotions and how it made us feel, and being very clear as to the exact behaviors that came out. So we can pinpoint and say, well, during the slide deck, I actually counted and you said 50 times. It makes it seem like you do not know what you are talking about, because there's so many filler words in the presentation that you did. And that made me feel very anxious, because I looked at the rest of the room and they weren't convinced around what it is that we have to offer. So being very clear as to exactly what it is that happened, exactly how it is that we felt, so taking our feelings and helping the person see what would have been a better way of approaching it, helps them to take the feedback. Is it going to be easy to take the feedback? Most probably not. It's going to suck a little bit, because we all want to be superheroes. I know, it's normal. So for the person getting the feedback, being open to it, and for the person giving the feedback, being very clear when we give that feedback. So when it comes back to relationships, not saying, well, it's me, it's not you. That's technically speaking not very clear. It's very vague. So what about me is it that isn't working with you? Right? Is it that we don't have the same value system? Is it that we don't, I don't know, like the same food? Is that a deal breaker for me? Is it not a deal breaker for me? Because how would the other poor person know what works and what doesn't work in somebody they perceive as a potential life partner? So making it clear for us also helps it make clear for the other person, so that we can both learn from the process. And if we don't learn, it's literally an experience that was wasted. So please do not waste your experiences.
Very good points. Thank you. Thank you. We're just out of time. I have another comment, which is, once you go and have this conversation, I've seen this happen so many times. You walk out of your boss's office and then you go up to, I can't believe it. This is what just happened. And then you start gossiping of, like, you just somewhat repaired the relationship. And then you're going and talking behind the person's back to other people. So I think that's something you really have to think about. And another thing that I feel really has to do with emotional intelligence and being at peace with yourself is the day of going around and talking about people behind their backs is over. I mean, the fact that it was ever here, it's about dealing with things from an intellectual point of view, but also one of emotional intelligence and one of just respect. That if you are good with yourself, if you do the work on yourself, then there's no need to go and talk about anyone else, because that's their journey. Now, if you have to interact with them, and if there is something that's not working, like that was a great example that you gave, that is a tough thing to do, to give feedback. But the way that you tee it up, for example, Mariska, I just wanted to let you know that the presentation was horrible because you really screwed it up. Now, you're immediately on the defensive. Wow, that's a lot to throw at somebody. Instead, hey, that was a really good presentation. I took a lot of notes. I'd like to share some of the feedback that I have with you. How would that be?
That feels a lot more open.
Exactly. When you take whatever the feedback is and you package it in this negative little box, it's like getting a box of coal. Nobody wants to open that. Nobody wants to sit with that. And for most things, there is a way through. There is a way forward. Let's find the solution. That's what I think the focus is. How can we find a solution to what was going on, to what is going on, so that we can be better as a team? We can be better as a couple. We can be better individuals.
Yeah. And part of that solution might be that the solution is not to be together.
Exactly.
That it's the end of that relationship, right? So
Yes.
Understanding that all of those options are still solutions. It's options. Thinking that we don't have options is one of the biggest mistakes we can ever make. So you have options. Just if you were wondering, now you know.
So true. It's so true. And the last thing I want to share is, when you get the negative feedback, and I've shared this about the children's books that we've had, I've been looking for ways to sell them. I'm on an island and there are children literally everywhere. And every legal entity that I went to, I got a red flag saying, no, you can't do it. No, it's not permissible. No, you can't do it. And I just thanked them. Thank you so much, because, okay, that's on my list. You're off, you're off, you're off. Where am I going to go next? Where am I going to get the yes? Because everything typically is a numbers game when it's in sales. And so you just find the next thing, find the next relationship. That doesn't mean run through people and act like they don't mean anything. No, that means maybe this relationship is a no, and letting go of it. It can be, you can be a yes with someone else. They can be a yes with someone else.
Exactly. And we are also, it's a little bit like with the children's book sales, right? Every time that there was a no, if we are curious about the no and we really dig into, okay, so what around this is a no, so that I can understand it better, it helps me to also build a little bit of a bigger knowledge base, basically, for myself. to understand what areas would make more sense for me to go and be in where I might get a yes. So understanding that a lot more helps us, whether it is in a personal relationship, whether it is in a selling a book. And being curious really, I don't know, it's a superpower that we don't use enough, and we all have it. Just look at that. We are humans and we are curious. Who would have guessed?
Mariska, nice job today. How can people reach out to you, and what is the value? What are the services you can provide for them?
Ooh, well, let's do the reach out part first. So reaching me, nice and easy. You can either email me, which is mariska@journey2discover.com, or alternatively, you can also find me on LinkedIn. Just write me a little message and we can connect and start our conversation. Then people or the services that I provide, as I mentioned earlier, helping our specialists going into leadership or leaders moving up into leadership. And I also help teams within that space. So I do that through coaching, training, facilitation. So there is a wide variety of different tools and techniques that I utilize to help within that space. And yes, if there is more humanness that you would like to bring into your conversations and environments, please do make sure that you give me a, well, not a call, but definitely an email or invite of some sort.
All right, beautiful. Thank you so much. And people can find you on Talking Heads on our, here in the States, our Thursdays at 6 p.m., which is your Friday at
10 a.m.
a.m. Okay. All right. Thank you for being here. Thank you for those who are watching on the live or the replay. We really do appreciate it. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week. I'll be back tomorrow with more shows, and Mariska will be back on Thursday here in the US, Friday in New Zealand, and some parts of Australia.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much. Bye for now, everyone.
Bye.